Welcome to Sandlot and the Crew, where Sandlot Radio Show meets Wrecking Yard Baseball and Softball. I'm your host, Will Kiger, a.k.a. Wrecking Yard Will. As always, I got with me Mr. Tad Powers, former minor league player, major league scout. He was once dunked on by Len Bias playing college basketball, ended his career. Guy's done a lot of cool stuff all over the world, all over the game. He's also the owner, operator of Sandlot Radio Show, and my partner on many endeavors, so we're lucky to have him. And today we have a very incredible guest, someone we're extremely happy to have, Mr. John Miedreich. He is the co-owner, vice chairman, and executive vice president of Baseball United, the newest, hottest thing in the game of baseball, straight out of the Middle East, right there in Dubai. John has a background in international affairs management. He was an NYPD cop for 21 years. He's started a baseball academy in the Dominican Republic and just doing a lot of really cool things in baseball. So we're really excited to have him on the show today to talk about his Sandlot story and also what he's doing now in Baseball United and how he got there. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Mr. Tad Powers.
John, it certainly is our pleasure to have you on the show. What you guys are doing over there, it's groundbreaking. It's time for this to happen. It's amazing to me that MLB International has made these efforts around the world, but it never really went to the Middle East. I'm kind of blown away by that. But the fact that you and a group of former major league players and your partner, Cash Sheikh, have come up with one of the coolest things that baseball has had to offer in a long time. It reminds me of LIV Golf. And you guys have the ability to shake up the baseball world similar to what LIV Golf has done. So, John, number one, thank you. And number two, let's talk about your Sandlot days. How did you fall in love with baseball? Long Island, got to be a Yankee or a Met fan, but I have a feeling it's the Mets.
Well, Tad, Will, appreciate the intro. Really, thankful to be on the show. Tad, I heard a lot about you and your background, but I missed that Len Bias piece, but that's awesome to know. Nice job with that, Will.
That'll make you quit in a heartbeat.
That's it. So, Sandlot days, I mean, I don't necessarily have a traditional baseball story like I'm sure many of your listeners or many of the guys you're involved with do. Grew up loving the game. I'm a Mets fan that hails from western Long Island, just a couple of miles over the Queens border outside the city limits. So grew up going to Shea Stadium back in the days. Those 86 Mets were one of the reasons I fell in love with the game of baseball. I was 7 years old at the time. Realized pretty early on that, a career in professional baseball was probably not in my cards from a playing perspective. Didn't realize that, what God had in the cards later on with what I was able to accomplish and what I'm able to be a part of, this blessing that is Baseball United. So, didn't even really play high school baseball. My brother was a college baseball player, but really stopped my playing career quite early. Started playing other sports like basketball and football, but always stayed close to the game and always really enjoyed and loved the game. When later on in my life, when I kind of was exposed to life and culture within the Dominican Republic, it kind of revitalized and reinvigorated a lot of that passion I felt early on in my life for the game of baseball. As you know better than anyone, Tad, with your experience internationally, just how inspiring it is to watch kids go up play in a Sandlot in the Dominican Republic. So, not a traditional baseball background as one would say, but I think a lot of my life experience, which I'll talk about in a little while, I'm sure, but those life experiences put me in a particular and unique place to bring the game of baseball with Baseball United. As you mentioned, Cash Sheikh, our CEO and president, and the rest of the ownership group. We believe that we have the most iconic and accomplished ownership group in the history of sports. So we're so excited on what we're doing and really just planting the seeds of the game that we love in a region that is so ripe, a sports-loving community. They're young, they're vibrant, and they want this, and now's the time.
So, John, let's back this up, though. Sandlot days, we're a little kid. We got a glove. We got a bat. Anything in the neighborhood going on where you could just go to an open field and there'd be some ball being played and you guys would just have a pickup game, make up your own rules based on the dimensions of the field and the equipment that you had. Did you ever do anything like that, like what you just described in the Dominican as a little kid?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that here in this country, in the United States, that was the case, probably, a couple of decades ago. And I'm sure even when you were growing up, right? Whether it was just going out and playing a pickup game at our local park, which was Rath Park in Franklin Square, New York, or, we did a ton of stickball, right? We would go down to the schoolyard. We would basically outline that box with some duct tape. That eventually, evolved, and we actually just painted that box on the wall, but played a ton of stickball growing up. So no doubt about it, whether it was stickball in the schoolyard or more traditional baseball at the local park. Started off on that 60-foot Little League field, and then, eventually migrated to that 90-foot field, which is where I kind of saw my days of the game, competitively stop. But nonetheless, love playing stickball actually continued. And then wiffle ball, actually, when we got even older, there was nothing better than, as teenagers and even like, late
Young
teens,
adults.
early 20s, we would,
Yeah.
we would go out on a Friday night and early Saturday morning, we'd be out, playing wiffle ball and then eventually softball. But yeah, no doubt about it.
So who were the guys? You mentioned you're a Mets fan, and the '86 Mets was. I mean, who were you trying to emulate up there with that skinny little stick and that tiny little ball trying to make contact?
I mean, you got to look at Strawberry, obviously, Hernandez, Backman, Lenny
Ollie
Dykstra,
Backman.
all
What a
those guys.
dirtbag.
So, all those guys, Mick Reynolds. So, those are the memories that I have, growing up for sure in the game.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, stickball in Long Island is the definition of Sandlot. That is exactly what I have a visual right now of these games that went on in your neighborhood and people calling their shots and saying they're Keith Hernandez and Lenny Dykstra. And, I just think that would be something that any kid would cherish. And I look back at my Sandlot days as some of the coolest things I ever did because there was no parents. There was nobody telling us what to do or when to stop or how to play. We just invented it all. And every venue had its own set of rules, dimensions, equipment, and we were creative because of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was just having a conversation. I have a 15-year-old son who, plays pretty high-level baseball here in South Carolina where I live now. And I was just talking to him about this. One of the things that I talked about from my childhood was the ability to be a dreamer, right? I literally, to your point, could put myself in that stickball, in that stickball game and literally think it was Game 7 of the 1986 World Series. And I think that back then, for sure, I have so many memories of myself just dreaming, whether it was, I mean, we're talking baseball now, but later on, on a basketball court and put myself, where I thought I was a member of the Chicago Bulls from the dynasty days with Michael Jordan, right? But the reality is, I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's I think that those times, are so cherished in my own life. And it gave me a lot of, to be honest with you, that dream and the ability to dream and kind of think bigger than just myself in the box at a stickball game has definitely given me the ability. And I think that dream carried over to where, it inspired a lot of myself being involved in Baseball United for sure.
So before Baseball United, let's talk about starting this baseball academy in the Dominican Republic. And through my international scouting, I've been to all the countries, the Latin American countries where they have academies. And there is a different level of passion for the game down there. Of course, the kids don't have as many opportunities unless they just stand out because everybody's playing. Everybody plays down there.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, baseball, specifically to the Dominican Republic, I mean, baseball is life, right? Baseball is like a religion there, right? I mean, culturally, it's so, it's in all pieces of culture. I mean, I don't care if you're talking a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, kids are going to the ballpark to play baseball, and not just a pickup game, as you mentioned. At times they do that, but for sure, it's a much more structured academy development process. Now, obviously, to your point, a big piece of it is, kids dreaming to be that next Dominican star, whether it's Tatis, Cano, Soto, Pedro Martinez, Adrian Beltre. Those kids, live that dream. And a lot of it is, to break the cycle of poverty, to get off the island, to have opportunity. So there's definitely that piece. But I just think the passion for the game of baseball is something that, here in the United States, I don't think the masses of people feel and live anymore. So it's so inspiring to go down there and see that and feel it and be a part of it for sure.
And then to carry that passion over to a part of the world where, again, I was not aware that many people were playing baseball and following it, but I'm very pleased to know. And to know that you guys have taken this risk. Let's talk about how this whole idea started with you and Cash and this ownership group that you've mentioned. And let's talk about who these owners are, because you said it's one of the most powerful, I don't know how to even say, ownership groups in the history of baseball, any sport, really.
No doubt about it. I mean, I mentioned that my baseball background's not one of the traditional, and Will had mentioned my career with the NYPD. And why I think it's important just to touch on this, because it ties to the region. I started as a young 21-year-old cop on that fateful day, September 11th, 2001. I was there later on in the afternoon. Wow. I wasn't there at the when obviously the first and second plane hit. Later on that day, just a few hours after that, I was mobilized to Brooklyn. Winded up making my way to the pile later on that day. Spent about the better part of the month and a half down there. From there, went out to the landfill, worked in the landfill where we sifted through debris for any kind of identifying evidence or anything like that. Nonetheless, and the reason I bring that up is because obviously as a 21-year-old, young rookie cop, I knew that this was a huge deal. But I don't think at that age, and really with that life experience, I would have understood how that really personally affected my life and the trajectory of my career. NYPD is a municipal organization. It's a 53,000 person organization with a $6 billion budget. But by about noon on September 11th, the NYPD knew that it had to have a much broader reach and a global understanding in order to best protect, America's largest city and the number one terror target on earth, better protect us from future attacks. So we created an international capacity and component to our counterterrorism and policing that has never been really duplicated since. I winded up in 2010, I applied for a position and winding up, being welcomed into the most prominent unit within the NYPD, where I actually spent 2.5 years embedded out in Amman, Jordan, working with Jordanian intelligence right on the border of Palestine, just about 20 or 30 miles south of Syria. I was sent there just as the Arab Spring broke out.
Wow.
So I could remember I lived in a house in southwest Amman, which was one of the last streets in the city as it continued to expand outward. And I remember literally, these rolling hills where you'd see shepherds still like tending to their flocks when I first got there, to the time I left there 2.5 years later. They became Syrian tent cities from all of the refugees that were displaced during the Syrian civil war. Did a lot of traveling in the region, really understanding Arab culture, Arab hospitality, and that experience kind of gave me, I believe, a unique experience to really the region, and that's one of the reasons why eventually, my experience, not just in baseball in the Dominican Republic, which I spoke about it briefly, But this experience into this region kind of set me apart. And then when I came home in 2013, when I went back to the New York after my 2.5 years in Jordan, I got promoted up a couple of times. I was an executive. My rank was lieutenant commander at the time in 2013. I was named actually the commanding officer of international operations, and I held that title for 8 years, where I was in charge of our global affairs. So, the tie to the region, the tie to the power players in the region, prime ministers and royal families, and directors of intelligence and all those things kind of put me in a unique position, I think, where Baseball United could use those talents, skills, and really
Connections.
Rolodex to kind of open up some doors.
The network that you created made it possible for Cash.
Well, what I would say is Cash surely has his own network and spent a lot of time living in the region when he worked with Procter and Gamble, the #1 marketing firm in the world. He was living in Dubai and actually ran that Middle East portfolio for them for some time. What I would say is my Rolodex and Cash's Rolodex, as well as the Rolodex of those and that network of that ownership group, put us in a unique position to kind of leverage these relationships as necessary now and over the past year or so that we've been doing this.
It's a pretty amazing story, mate. What we want to do when we come back from our break, because we're going to take a little generic break, we'll talk about the ownership group, the difference between Baseball United and Major League Baseball, some of the players that you guys have reeled in. I love the idea of this regional player thing that you did with the Ugandan kid. I got a kid from the Ukraine that you got to get your eyes on.
No
I
doubt
almost
about
got him signed over here,
Awesome.
and then the war was going to break out, and he had to go home.
Wow.
And since then, we've been trying to get him back, and it's a challenge. But this might be perfect. This kid runs a 6'4", 60.
Wow.
He's legit fast twitch muscle guy, and the only Ukrainian ever to come out, pro. So he would be a guy.
Oh, no doubt about it. Those are things we're definitely interested in doing. We're trying to give kids opportunities from these places that we believe there's definitely growth opportunity. The only reason, Tad, you talked about your minor league career earlier, and the reason why you were able to, as a young kid, project yourself and dream to play at that level is because the people who went before you, who looked like you, talked like you, came from where you came from. We believe the only way that kids from the Ukraine, kids from India, Pakistan, the Middle East are going to be able to play at the highest levels of this game is if we give opportunities to kids who can play, right? Who can play. If you don't have somebody who looks like you, talks like you, and comes from where you come from, playing at the highest levels, what would make one think they can aspire to do so? So Baseball United is committed to that grassroots development, that community engagement, to give kids opportunities from these regions that, typically or historically don't have a huge, let's say, baseball representation at the highest levels. But we're looking to change that and give these kids some opportunities.
I know it's made a huge difference from Australia. Back in the day, they had Craig Shipley and then David Nielsen and Graham Lloyd. And seeing those guys in the major leagues and World Series and All-Star games, that inspired young Australians to want to do it. Plus, they saw that the highest paid cricketers were getting 150 grand and, baseball players were making 10 million. And they started to do the math and realized if I'm a real good athlete and I have a choice, I'm going to go with this baseball game. And I think that's all it's going to take with your baseball and in the cricket world as well, because there were some cricketers that I would have loved to sign, but I couldn't lure them away. They had that kind of, every tool that you could imagine to be a good baseball player, they had it, but they were embedded in cricket. They weren't going to do it.
No doubt about it. I couldn't agree with you more. When we talked about the transferable skills, the hitting, the throwing, the hitting for power, the fielding, the running, it's all the same transferable skills, obviously, between the bat and ball sport of baseball and the #1 bat and ball sport on earth, cricket. What we believe is, when you look at India, for example, as a country, 1.3 billion people, obviously, the males in that country and the females as well are, inspired and dream for one of those spots on the national cricket team, right? But those obviously are limited. When you're talking about a country of 1.3 billion people, you're talking about 24 potential opportunities. When we created, or when we basically set out on this journey with Baseball United, what was different about what we're trying to do is, and some of the other leagues, and you mentioned this before, instead of us, let's say, finding a player potentially from the cricket realm who can play baseball and plucking them out and bringing them over here to play, what we said was, no, there's got to be some kind of personal ownership that, for example, the first franchise that we launched was the Mumbai Cobras. We want people from Mumbai, the same way myself as a Mets fan can think back to those days at Shea Stadium and now Citi Field, and there's that personal accountability and ownership to be a part of that from a fan perspective. That's what we're trying to create here in Baseball United. I'm using Mumbai as the example. That we want the Indian population, particularly in Mumbai, to get behind that, right? And give a kid from Mumbai. We gave 3 kids an opportunity: Akshay Mogal, Akshay Mori, and Saurabh Gaikwad, the 3 Indian prospects. We gave these 3 kids an opportunity to play in our showcase a couple of weeks back. And what they will do is, now they're going to be playing eventually once we launch the first games of that Mumbai franchise. There'll be 3 of the players there, because the reality is, and I talked about this actually in the locker room, in both clubhouses before the first game of our showcase, and I talked about a little bit of the trajectory, how everything comes full circle. I talked to the professional guys in the rooms, the guys who played in the big leagues, the guys who played in AAA, some of the indie ball studs we had on that showcase roster. And I said, look, the reason why you guys eventually got there was somebody to believe in you, somebody to help you, and you ultimately could dream to play at the highest levels because people who went before you. Now, you guys in the locker room are this inspiration for these 4 prospects who are in the same locker room, sharing that locker room. I'll give the 3 Indian prospects that I mentioned. When they first got over there, they were a little bit shy in the clubhouse. Kind of, I guess, felt like, did they really belong? But then when you have the likes of one of our co-owners and our player co-owner, Robbie Cano, who literally just grabbed those guys and sat those guys out and stretched with them in front of his locker in the clubhouse, was an unbelievable experience. He actually took out his cell phone, went on his Instagram page, gave his phone to all 3 kids, said, find yourself, and started following them and their stories on Instagram, right? So that was an unbelievable thing, just to break that barrier and kind of include them into what, we were doing, right? And the point why I make that point is because it was important for Robbie to understand that, yeah, you could dream playing the big leagues because your dad did, right? His father was a pitcher in the big leagues for a short time, and all the guys who came from San Pedro Macorís, where he's from. But now Robbie is that inspiration for these kids, right? But full circle, the speech I gave in the clubhouse before the game 1 was where it comes full circle is, once those 2 kids, 2 of them were pitchers, Saurabh and Akshay Moore were pitchers. And Akshay Mogal was one of our DRs, our designated runners, right? And when he's on the base path and the other 2 kids were on the mound that night, man, they were the inspiration, and they are the inspiration for kids all around India today, because those kids can put themselves in Akshay's shoes or Saurabh's shoes much easier than they can the likes of Robbie Cano. So it all comes full circle, for sure.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Will, you want to take us to a break, and we'll come back and talk more about the league and the owners and the difference in the rules and how cool this league is compared to MLB.
So, yeah, we're going to go to break. Before we do that, though, just want to say, yeah, absolutely incredible stuff, John. Love what you guys are doing, here at Sandlot and the Crew and Sandlot Radio Show. Tad and I are just huge fans of the game of baseball. So to see you guys spreading it throughout the Middle East to a population that's already got a lot of bat-on-ball skills, it's awesome stuff, what you're doing in the DR. The story with the international law enforcement is incredible. I had no idea the NYPD even did that. And then for you to be there during 9/11 is just, it's mind
As
blowing
a
stuff.
kid,
So thank you
you
for
were
your service.
21, dude.
And, RIP to everyone who lost their lives in that terrible tragedy. And, appreciate all the first responders who went out there and got to work that day and all the following days to come. So we're going to go to a break. You're listening to Sandlot and the Crew, where Sandlot Radio Show meets Wrecking Yard Baseball and Softball. I'm your host, Will Kiger. We got Mr. Tad Powers and Mr. John Miedreich, and we are going to be coming back with part 2 for more of John's story, so stay tuned.